Hello, class. To finish some other thoughts about civil liberties, I wanted to bring in the movie Up to make an example. And the movie Up, if you've ever seen it, there's at the very beginning, there's an older gentleman, maybe not always such a gentleman, but there's an older man who is being asked by construction workers and business people around him to move because clearly they're building something and his house is in the way. So in the movie Up, as you know, very realistically, he just decides to balloon his house out of there. Um, but in real life, what is that situation called, and is there a civil liberty hidden in that somewhere? Yes. And so what we're going to do for this one is look at the Fifth Amendment. Yes, Up is actually teaching us about the Fifth Amendment. So the Fifth Amendment, we've already talked about some parts of it. It's a very big amendment. We talked about already that no double jeopardy, right? You all are well versed in that now. Some great questions asked, by the way, in the post discussions. But as we move along, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what else about civil liberties do I need to know in the Fifth Amendment? And what else you need to know is that there is at least the right to remain silent, to not incriminate yourself. There are at least two or three other rights in there. This one we're talking about with the movie Up is called Eminent Domain. Eminent domain. And what that means is eminent domain comes from the Fifth Amendment. And here's what it means. It means the government can only take your house for two reasons, under two conditions. Under two conditions. One, the Constitution says they give you just compensation. So they give you what your house is actually worth, right? And maybe even a little bit more, so that you won't be so cranky like the guy in Up, right? And there has to be a compelling state interest. What the heck does that mean? Compelling state interest means that there has to be a really good reason the government needs to take your land, to give you money for it, and to ask you to move. Okay, so what would count, or what would be considered, something that's necessary from the government? Well, a lot of times, you all know this, it would be something like they're going to build a highway and expand a highway, or build a mall or expand a mall, or build a parking lot for a mall. And there goes your house or your grandma's house or your friend's house. And that's a very normal thing to have happen on occasion in America because of eminent domain. What it's saying is that the government cannot take your land for no reason. They cannot take your private property. They cannot ask you to move for no reason. There has to be a really good reason. Now, how is a parking lot and a shopping mall and all this and a highway a compelling state interest? How is that a compelling state interest to make me move? Well, the answer is because money, economics. So what the government will say is, well, look, I mean, we build this new shopping mall or expand this highway and have the shopping mall, say, expanded or whatever. We're going to have tourists coming. We're going to have people coming, stopping off their trips and coming to this exit and spending money. And we're going to make money in our town off of sales tax. And we're going to be able to spend that on nice parks and things for everybody. So does that kind of make sense? So eminent domain can be easily explained away as, look, we're trying to help the economy, the local economy, wherever we're taking the house. That area is who is going to benefit from the economic change that requires tearing down houses. If you are one of those people and you're not in Up and you can't get out in a balloon, you're probably going to have to take a government check and find another place to live, because basically the government is allowed to do it under those two conditions. So just the Constitution says with just compensation. So think justice, right? Now you might say, and this would be a fascinating question for a lawyer, what if I found the value of my house, we found the value of my house was only $200,000. But the sentimental value of my house is, to me, worth millions of dollars because my great great grandmother and grandfather built it, or this or that, right? So how do you put into terms, in money terms, all the memories you had at that house and this and that? That's the harsh part about eminent domain. It may or may not, the government may or may not take that into account. Usually when they're doing a big project and your house is in the way, you're going to get a fairly generous, just compensation check, and you're going to look for somewhere else to live. So you might say, how is that a civil liberty? Well, think about it this way. It is a harsh reality if that happens to you. But think about it this way. What if there were no rule at all in the Constitution about when the government can take your house and under what condition? Then the government would be potentially allowed to do eminent domain anywhere, anytime, for any reason, and just take people's houses and just tell them to move, not even give them any money. Does that make sense? So the civil liberty here in the Fifth Amendment that we're learning about with eminent domain is the right to be free from the government taking your house arbitrarily. Arbitrary is a word that you'll hear used by a lot of teachers. I remember probably a second or third year in college, I had finally had enough. I'd heard the word so much. I finally was in a sociology class that I didn't necessarily want to be in that badly, a little bit bored, and he kept saying the word arbitrary, and I finally raised my hand. I was like, what the heck does that mean? And I think he was shocked that I didn't know, and I therefore felt embarrassed. But I'm glad I asked it because I'm pretty sure everyone else in the class had not Googled it either. And arbitrary, for simple turn of phrase, you could say is random. Arbitrary is not thoughtful process by which you do something. Arbitrary is whimsical, like by the whim or randomness of what you just pick a number and that's the number, right? So arbitrary, if I say that now, forgive me if I've said it before without defining it. It's a great word. It's just it's a fancy way of essentially saying random. It's not quite random, but you'll see as the use of it, as you read it now in literature and you hear it in lecture, you'll understand the use of it better, hopefully now. So the government cannot, now that we learned arbitrary, cannot arbitrarily take your land, take your possessions, and tell you to move, or worse, just make you move and not give you any money. They can't do that. Civil liberty there is that eminent domain. They've got to at least give you just compensation, and they've got to have a good reason to do it. Again, we might not agree with that being a good reason, but legally it has to hold up. Okay, awesome. So you now know under what conditions your house can be essentially seized by the government. Another question to ask ourselves with civil liberties, as we've kind of come to terms with most of them now. First Amendment we talked about extensively, Second Amendment, Eighth Amendment, Fifth again today, just now, and we're going to just round this out with the Fourth Amendment and maybe a question at the end as well. So the Fourth Amendment, we already said, clearly states that the government cannot search or seize your stuff without a warrant or probable cause. Okay, so let's just break down what that means. If you're driving home right now, you shouldn't be watching this unless you're in the passenger seat. You're driving home and you get pulled over, right, from wherever you're driving, and you know you haven't done anything illegal while you were driving. Got your seatbelt on, you're not talking on your cell phone, you weren't swerving, you're going the speed limit, you put on your turn signals, whatever it was, you've done everything, and you get pulled over. If the police officer then, after pulling you over without a reason, finds something that you have illegal in your car, the Constitution would dictate that that cannot be used in court, because the Constitution says you cannot unreasonably search or seize someone. And unreasonable would mean randomly, arbitrarily, I'm going to pull this person over and just see what's in their car. You can't do that. They could have 16,000 loaded guns, 1,400 pounds of drugs. They could have whatever whatever they had in there. You have to come about finding that out legally. And that means that they had to have swerved. They had to have had a taillight out. Yep, that counts because it's technically a safety violation, right? So you have a taillight out. Okay, now they can pull you over. But this is important because especially today with what's happening in the country and the racial reconciliation that I hope is coming, we have to acknowledge that there was once a time that there was, and not, I shouldn't even say once a time, sadly. There was once a time that it was frequent and not rare where someone would get pulled over because of the color of their skin. That was the probable cause. That's racism. That's unconstitutional and obviously wrong. So if we want to look at this from the big picture, the Fourth Amendment is really important because otherwise, if a police officer is racist, because any human being could be in any given profession, we hope they weren't and aren't. But let's just say the police officer is racist and then just wants to pull someone over because of the color of their skin. Under constitutional law, they cannot do that. Now, has it happened? Of course it has. Is it unconstitutional? Of course it is. Are there times where officers use other reasons and they won't say that it's the color of your skin, but that is the ultimate primary motivating factor in pulling you over? Of course, that's called racial profiling. It's almost impossible to find, if it is even possible to find, statistics on how often this happens, because for a lot of reasons, think about how difficult it would be to get a clear number. So we may not know how rare or frequent it is, but we know this: it's unconstitutional. A police officer cannot pull someone over based on the color of their skin, period. Based on their accent, based on anything other than them, and this is so important, other than the police maybe having a suspicion that they have committed a crime, are committing a crime, or about to commit a crime. So they're swerving, they are committing a crime. Whoever they is, white, black, it doesn't matter. Whoever the person is that the police pull over, right? They have to have a reason. A legal reason means they've broken a law. Your taillight's out, okay, that's technically against the law, so you're going to get pulled over, right? That is constitutional, that's fair, that's considered fine. What's not considered fine is when you pull someone over arbitrarily, right? Because you don't like them, what they look like, the bumper stickers on their car, whatever it is, that's not consistent with the Fourth Amendment. So this is good news. It's good news for police officers too, because there are a lot of honest police officers that do want to obey the Constitution, and doing it the right way protects them, right? Legally protects them. Why, if you're a good police officer, why would you want to violate the Fourth Amendment? You wouldn't. It's a great thing when everyone respects the Constitution. It's a win-win, right? Because when we're talking about the Fourth Amendment, that means you're only getting hassled by police if you show a legal reason to need to be hassled, which means like you're swerving, you're drunk, your breath reeks of alcohol as you've been pulled over. Now, that doesn't mean you should end up in death. It does not mean that should end up in death. But we're talking about the Fourth Amendment, so we're talking about the beginning of the arrest or the pulling over. Whoever you are watching this, when you drive anywhere, if a police officer pulls you over, they're probably going to ask you, do you know why I pulled you over? And it's a brilliant question, because if you answer it honestly and you say, well, I know I was speeding back there, please have mercy on me, you may or may not get the mercy, but you just pled guilty. You just said you did it. You just said, I know I was speeding. Oh, I know I ran the red light, but I'm so sorry. Can you please? And you just revealed, you literally just pled guilty right there to the officer. So I'm not your lawyer, but I'm telling you, constitutionally, you know that the Fourth and Fifth Amendments can work together. Any amendments, all amendments could and do overlap, are fungible. Go look that word up. Fungible, interchangeable. So the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment go together, right? Because if you are pulled over, it has to be for a reason, like you've broken a law, or if you're stopped by police in any situation, it has to be because of that. And then the person has the right to remain silent. If you want to look up the court case, Miranda versus Arizona, that's why we have our Miranda rights now that we all see on our favorite legal TV shows. Hopefully not some being read your rights, but that's what that is, right? The Miranda rights are you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney, and we're going to talk about that in the civil rights section next video, so you have to wait a second for that one. But these are all, as we said, fungible, interchangeable, important amendments that protect, and this is the key, your civil liberties, which again are freedoms from government. It's not so much that the government is doing something, they're not doing something. They're refraining from impeding your right to free exercise of religion, to freedom of speech, to, right? They're essentially the government saying laissez-faire, hands off, in the places where the government is saying laissez-faire, like not making you talk when you get pulled over by police, the right to remain silent. In those spaces where the government is restraining itself, those places are called civil liberties. That's another way to look at it. Some people have also referred to it as negative rights, but that sounds like, oh, negative, a bad connotation. What it means is essentially there's a lack of government. And the lack of government is the negative thing. And in that lack of space where the government is now no longer in that sphere, then personal liberty grows. And I think we already said this, right? That as you could put it one of two ways. As government increases, liberty decreases, or as liberty increases, government decreases. That's the idea of civil liberties. In other words, and this is where I was going to leave you with some questions. Is it the government's role to legislate things like, in other words, is it the government's role to legalize or make illegal, whichever you choose, things like drugs, illegal drugs, the drugs that are illegal now, and then the other thing would be the right to die, the right to, if you are sick from a terminal illness, say, the right to have a will that says, I don't want to live any longer, or physician-assisted suicide. Those are huge questions. Let me just give the first to you, and then you can think about the second. The first is the war on drugs in general. And people who fight for civil liberties are usually called civil libertarians. The ACLU is a big organization that goes with that. You don't have to agree with everything they do. I'm just letting you know that they're an organization that battles for civil liberties. But these organizations are going to push for the government to get out of whatever space it is they're talking about. So there's actually a lot to do with the Constitution and the mandate from, the fact that the Constitution gives us these various liberties and freedoms. It's really up to the people to demand that the government doesn't infringe on those rights, and it's also up to the government to not infringe and to not, disobey essentially the Constitution. Remember, we talked about Sheriff Joe Arpaio from Arizona, where the law was a violation of the Fourth Amendment, where they were racial profiling, and in Arizona for a time it was legal, and the Supreme Court shot it down and said that is not right, it's not constitutional, and the sheriff still continued to uphold the old law. So this is real life today, real life examples of, civil liberty. So going back to the drug question, civil libertarians are going to ask themselves and ask society, is it the government's business if someone does drugs in the privacy of their own home, doesn't drive, doesn't have kids around, and doesn't hurt anyone? So those are some important things, right? No one else is being hurt or affected in any way. There are no kids around, and you're in the privacy of your own residence, wherever that is. So civil libertarians, as I was saying, they would say it's none of the government's business. If you want to do anything from drink alcohol to smoke marijuana to do heroin to do cocaine, please don't go do these things. But libertarians or civil libertarians would say it's not the government's place. The government should refrain. The government should stay out. It's people's choice. It's their life. If you wanted to eat Big Macs every day, like that movie where a documentary where the guy eats McDonald's every day, and it shows the health implications on his body. If you wanted to do that, you would be allowed to. Civil libertarians would say. But if you wanted to do drugs and hurt your body in the exact same way, you would go to jail and be a criminal. And so that'll lead us to next lecture that talks about civil rights, and it's a big question. Because just to give you a figure, that the most recent figure from the FBI that records these numbers nationally is that African Americans use marijuana at the same rate as Caucasians. So black and white people use marijuana at about the same rate. Surveys show, polls show, but African Americans are almost 3 times more likely to be arrested for the same thing. So that's a civil liberties question that also is fungible in some ways with civil rights, which is our next chapter. And then the last question I was going to leave you with, and I know it's intense and a heavy one, but as a civil liberties expert now, the question I would pose to you is, and I'm not going to try to answer it for you, something really important for society to think about is, does somebody who wants to die have the right to die? Should the person that wants to die be allowed to die without the government trying to stop them? So remember, the scenario in which this is going to be legalized in states like Oregon and other places is under the idea that someone is suffering a chronic illness, they're going to die of cancer, they're going to die of something very painful and horrible, and they don't want to suffer, and so they're given some pills by their physician that that kill them. And in Holland and Netherlands and other places, other countries, this is, some people refer to it as euthanasia. Other people refer to it as physician-assisted suicide. Other people who are for it would say that it's compassionate end-of-life care and compassionate end-of-life choices. So I'm not telling you which one to believe, but I want you to think about that question is, does the government have the right? Because it doesn't say in the Constitution one way or another, people should be allowed to or not allowed to die by their own hands or by their doctor's hands if they want to, as long as it's mutual and it's, I think in Oregon there's 3 different doctors and psychologists, psychiatrists that each have to independently verify your mental state and your medical status and so forth. So this is a great question to ask as a society. Going back from the last little lecture there with the death penalty, what should be considered a civil liberty that is a space that's sacred and government can't come in, and when should the government step in and either do something or make a law or enforce a law, etc. So leave you with some deep questions to ponder. I hope civil liberties have made sense to you. Remember that with the right to privacy that was first really articulated in Roe v. Wade in 1970s, you're going to see that today, probably more than ever, there's a push for civil liberties in terms of stuff like legalizing marijuana is way more popular today than 20 years ago. I think it's about doubled the percentage of Americans who are for it in the last 30 years. So all of these issues are questions of civil liberties, questions of privacy. Remember, Roe v. Wade established that as a constitutional precedent. And so that leads to the question of, how much privacy do I have on my phone? We've been commenting on this, a lot of you all on our page there. You know, it feels like your phone or Facebook or Instagram or these things sort of know everything about you and can track you. And I mean, a lot of that is absolutely true, if not most of it. And that's another question of civil liberties, right? Is that if you're doing it with a private organization and you're giving up your right to privacy to Facebook because that long thing that you just scrolled through and then said, I agree, all that stuff's in there that none of us read. That all says that I mean, we could go read it, get the exact wording, but that's where you're signing away your privacy rights, and that's why the ads are so personalized, incredibly personalized to you. Like I said, I think there was one day where my kids and I were playing in the little backyard that we have, got a little goal, and of course soccer, football. Fútbol es el idioma de todo el mundo. Sí. Pero we're playing in our backyard. Ball goes over the fence. Our neighbors are so nice, but they work at home, and I don't want to go knock on their door and say, "Can you throw the ball back over?" So I thought, man, I wish I had a big net to sort of catch the balls if we kick it too high. And I'm not joking that when I went on Facebook next, this was, I don't know how long ago, a year or two ago, I went on Facebook right after that conversation with my kids, and it was like a net that blocks soccer balls. I'm like, who sells such a thing? That's so specific. So I don't know the extent to which our privacy is violated, if you will, by private companies. I would assume that when you sign that, you're not signing, you're just clicking, right? The 300-400 pages of writing that some Facebook lawyers did in Instagram, you're essentially signing away your rights to privacy. But the question is, how much can the government surveil you? How much can the government track you? There are apps on your phone, I think right now you could easily get, that are like COVID-19 trackers. And just to be clear, it's meant to be, as far as I know, and some people would even dispute this, but the innocent explanation that people who advocate for it would say is that we're trying to find who did you hang out with that had the virus so that we can isolate people and know who has it and who doesn't, and who's contagious and who doesn't. But people who don't like it are saying, are you serious? You want me to tell you who I've been hanging out with, government? You want me to report to you everything I've been doing, basically a map of my life? So these are great privacy questions, civil liberties questions. I could go on forever, but I hope these examples at least get you thinking about, okay, what are civil liberties? How much do I know about them? How much do I want them to expand, or how much do I think they're already too, maybe you think they're too great and you think the government should take a step in the other direction. So whatever you think, I hope you're thinking. I hope you enjoyed this part 2 mini lecture. I will see you all soon. God bless. All the best. Professor V.